As a male, I thought I was fully convinced that I was addicted to sex before I had even had it.
The way you dress or by the way you give part of that gift away, you sort of kind of unwrap it. And when you get a gift, you don't want it unwrapped or you don't want it all tarnished. You want a gift that's wrapped in, hey, this is yours. This is what I've been saving for you.
There is a war on men, and lust is the weapon. Religion demands purity, but gives no real guidance on how to navigate male sexuality.
Growing up in church, purity culture, where in Bible studies we'd have to go around and say how many times we had masturbated that week and then feel shame about it. There was definitely a benefit to this, or at least there was supposed to be this benefit.
What I would say to Christian girls is it's hard to understand the differences between us, knowing that guys struggle with sexual purity more.
If you have a junior high boy who has a laptop computer or a desktop or whatever, or access to a computer in the privacy of his own room, you may as well just buy hundreds and hundreds of pornographic magazines.
Sexual purity is important, knowing that you're not the only one that's involved. You're bringing somebody else down with you.
Hello and welcome to Unreligiously. My name is Lauren, and today we are going to be diving into a super highly requested video by you guys, which is on purity culture, but specifically today on how it impacts men. Something that is interesting about purity culture that I have found, and that you guys might have found as well, is that the conversation almost exclusively applies to women when you go into the broader media, when you go look for content. People might talk a little bit about how it impacts men directly after they get married, but that's pretty much it. Throughout my research, almost all of the research was based on women and their experiences.
All right, let's talk purity culture. As a male, sometimes I feel weird speaking into this arena because women had it way worse, in my opinion, than men. You see, women had to carry their burden plus our burden, where men only had to carry our burden.
Throughout my research, I actually found several articles that tried to claim, or they would imply, that purity culture primarily affects teen girls. Teen girls. And while, yes, it does impact teen girls, I think that it just as much impacts teen boys and adult women and adult men out their entire lives.
There is a war on men, and lust is the weapon. Religion demands purity, but gives no real guidance on how to navigate male sexuality. Twisting natural urges into guilt, branding the body as inherently sinful, and burying men in their own shame. And then the distortions of our society weaponizes that shame against us and hijacks the spirit, rewiring men to chase false promises.
I think that to sum it up to a teenage problem is to minimize the problem. It certainly is a problem among these younger ages, but these teen years, especially if you are growing up in purity culture, these aren't the years where you really are sexually exploring, where you're really grappling with these things, where you're trying to deconstruct some of the negative beliefs, where you are going through therapy, where you're trying to talk through these issues with a partner. These are not the years where you really even realize the consequences. I have made one video, this was one of the first videos I made on this channel, called The Monetization of Sexual Shame, and I specifically recommend this video to anybody that is interested in this video if you're a man that's gone through purity culture, and for any women as well that have gone through purity culture and have been impacted by the church's claims of porn addiction and the forced labeling of porn addiction on many people, men and women alike. But today's video is really focused on men. Please share your experience in the comments, but please hold space for the men in this video, because I will say I've given this exact same speech and disclaimer on my other videos that are for women on this topic, or are specifically focusing on women. I think they all apply to everyone, and you'll see as the video goes on. But men have really held space for women in those videos, and so I just ask that we do the same thing here. And yeah, let's dive right into it. Purity culture is one of the most recognizable parts of evangelical Christianity, particularly in the United States. If you grew up part of purity culture or in the evangelical or fundamentalist spaces way back in the 90s or the early 2000s, then you are going to remember a lot of this. Purity culture wasn't just a set of rules, but it was an entire environment or atmosphere that they created for the young people. There were accountability partners who you had to tell everything to. They gave you modesty talks at youth group. If you grew up in this time, then you definitely remember the really weird and degrading object lessons, like sticking two pieces of paper together, gluing them together, I should say, and tearing them apart, rose petals being plucked off a rose petal, or a chewed up piece of gum. Those types of lessons were running rampant during that time frame. But purity culture wasn't solely about sex. It was also about the identity that you had. It was about belonging. And most importantly, in the church's eyes, it was about control. This brand of spirituality of evangelical Christianity, it treated sexuality as a spiritual check system, like a spiritual report card. It was a sign that you were faithful enough to God, that you truly loved God enough, and that you were willing to deny the flesh, that you were really willing to commit yourself to your community. Purity culture was really prominent back in the early 1990s and the 2000s.
It's like a present that you have for your wife, and she has for you. And if you're going around being sexually impure, or just by the
during this time, this even came more into popular culture. You had people like the Jonas Brothers with their purity rings, and people would do purity balls, virginity pledges. This was a big topic in youth group, and there were a lot of books and speakers and conferences that you would attend that were around these themes. If you guys grew up or went to church during this time, you definitely will remember the modesty rules, the gender roles, the discouragement of dating, or traditional dating, really, and then any sort of self-pleasure or exploration of your body, including even just learning about it, like reading a textbook about it. And even though it did start to fade a little bit from the limelight in the mainstream media around the 2000s, that didn't mean that it went away, and the impact is still absolutely there. In my opinion, it is absolutely being taught in the churches today. They just don't give it a face in the media anymore because of the backlash towards purity culture. But these rules didn't go away. This wasn't a fad that came and left. This has been the church's opinion on purity for longer than purity culture has been a term. This user on Reddit, I think, summed up their experience with purity culture really well. They said, purity culture is very harmful to boys and young men because it lumps all forms of impurity together. Pedophilia, rape, sexual assault, non-consensual sex, premarital rape, homosexual sex, sexual fantasies, masturbation, pornography, watching R-rated movies, and having impure thoughts. All in one same umbrella of sexual impurity. And since the definition is so loose, every boy by the time they hit teenage years have done something impure. I want you guys to really sit. We're going to break down, there's 3 paragraphs in this comment, and we're going to break it down, but really sit with that for a second. Imagine that you're going through purity culture and all of these things are lumped into one category. If you masturbate or you rape somebody, those are kind of seen as the same thing to your leaders. And that's not to say that they are minimizing sexual assault in the church, which many churches do that, but it is to say that the shame of committing such a heinous act is put on young boys who are just behaving normally for their age. Finally, this commenter says, then there's the guilt. How are we supposed to have victory over these impure thoughts? Jesus, of course. The Holy Spirit will cleanse you of your sin nature that you were born with. So if you're a teenage boy and you don't get the magical ability to stop thinking about sex, then you must not be a very good Christian because the Holy Spirit is ghosting you for some reason. So we'll add shame and guilt for being a shitty Christian on top of the shame and guilt for doing things that are just as bad as the worst sexual assault crimes imaginable. Fuck purity culture. Purity culture starts at a young age, and it starts by teaching young boys about their sexuality way before they ever actually understand what sexuality even is.
I actually remember the first time I noticed a girl's butt. I was in middle school. I was a boy. It was normal. And I told a youth leader about it later, and not out of a sense of confession, but I thought I had an epiphany. And what I remember saying was, I just appreciated it. And what I was trying to tell him was that we could look at women without lusting. That was possible. And what he should have said is, yeah, it's possible, but let's make sure you weren't being creepy and think about it from her perspective. Instead, what he did was shame her for the track shorts I said she was wearing, and then shamed me for not lusting. Like he interrogated my thought process, then acted like it was weird that a 13-year-old virgin could just be like, nice. That's also the first time I remember looking at a church leader and thinking, you're wrong.
Before these young boys ever have any sense of desire or even understanding what a marriage or a relationship is, they're already being told that they can't trust their minds, that their flesh is evil.
The way you dress or by the way you give part of that gift away, you sort of kind of unwrap it. And when you get a gift, you don't want it unwrapped or you don't want it all tarnished. You want a gift that's wrapped in, hey, this is yours, this is what I've been saving for you. And I believe that that's what the Lord meant it to be.
Jesus says that you should not be sexually impure, and obviously if that's what you believe in Jesus, then you're definitely going 100% against what he has said.
Bottom line, that's what's most important is my relationship with Christ, and that's more important than me fulfilling my desires of the flesh and the desire of my eyes. So I just think it's really important for my walk with Christ.
They were taught that their bodies were always 1 second away from making the wrong choice or sinning against their own flesh, and that if they weren't vigilant 24/7, that they could harm themselves, they could harm others, like women that they're engaging with, and they could even harm their relationship with God. Men who have had to go through purity culture experiences describe what they went through as psychological gaslighting. Their emotions were constantly being invalidated by the people higher up than them, who were there to mentor them and to lead them. There's a study that I found called I Kissed Shame Goodbye, and I'm going to be referencing it throughout this video. This is a direct quote from that study. Gaslighting as a purity culture tactic was reported multiple times in interviews, with adolescents being told they could not trust their own minds, hearts, and bodies. The confusion carried over into adulthood. I'm going to read that to you guys one more time. Gaslighting as a purity culture tactic was reported multiple times in interviews, with adolescents being told that they could not trust their own minds, hearts, and bodies. The confusion carried over into adulthood. They were told that the body that they were given by God was inherently wrong, was inherently faulty and sinful, and that the only safe thing was to hand their entire sense of self, their autonomy, over to the church, over to people who knew better than them. The church, at the end of the day, would be the one to determine whether their motives were bad or good, if they were lustful or not. And none of this is really about teaching self-control at the end of the day. It's about teaching people to not trust themselves. This user on Reddit said, "It seems like men can be equally damaged by purity culture, but the word purity is not often applied to men. Instead, the euphemisms often used in the church for men are accountability, lust. It's more like accountability culture." And I really like that phrase because I feel like when you think about the impact that it has on men, these words like accountability culture or like lust or things like that, those almost are more accurate for the male experience, and we'll keep getting into that more. As boys grow a little bit older and start to enter puberty, their adolescence, then purity culture is reintroduced to them, and it just looks a little bit different this time. Now they're talking about courtship, and in some cases they might still call it dating, but it's really not the same dating that your friends are doing. In this type of dating or courtship, you're not really supposed to touch the other person, you're definitely not supposed to kiss, you're not supposed to fantasize, and you're really not even supposed to be alone with them. This means for young boys growing up, they're not even allowed to spend time alone with girls to have a private conversation with a girl that they like. Their text messages might be getting read over, or their emails if you go back that far. They were told that they weren't allowed to date, to court, unless they were sure that they were headed towards marriage and that they were essentially ready for marriage at that time, which for young boys is almost impossible. You're told both that you are supposed to get married young and have kids young, but that as a man, you're also supposed to be able to financially support a wife and however many children God decides to bless you with yourself. You're supposed to be able to do it on one income. The church tells you at this time that both of those things are true, but how do you even find a spouse if you can't date? You're told that you're dangerous unless you're supervised, so how do you even meet the one? It's impractical, and a lot of people who grew up in purity culture talk about how it actually delayed their dating and finding a partner. This Redditor said, I didn't date in high school because I had been taught that unless you basically could already comfortably see yourself marrying the person, then you shouldn't date. It made me set ridiculously high standards for who I would consider dating, which obviously very few people could meet. The people who I did think met this standard somewhat filled me with such a strong infatuation that I put them on a pedestal, and it broke my heart way more than it should have to hear I'd rather just be friends. When I became an atheist at 18, I'd only recently overcome a lot of these dating issues in the last year or so. For instance, I've only relatively recently accepted that losing my virginity doesn't have to be in some deeply emotional context where sex is the biggest expression of our undying love for each other, LOL. You're preemptively taught about sex and dating, and you're taught how things are supposed to go. This means that you're taught that courtship is the right thing to do. You're taught that you're not supposed to have any physical contact, you're not supposed to fantasize, and you're supposed to be ready to support a family before you get married at 18 or a very young age. And if you do wait till marriage, then you're going to have a smoking hot wife and a kick-ass sex life. Cue the youth pastor voice here, I guess. You guys know this already, but the reward for following this basically impossible set of rules is always framed as just if you wait, then you're going to have an amazing marriage. You guys will have an awesome sex life and you won't really have any problems. You're told that if you follow the purity culture rules, that God will bless your obedience and your loyalty with a smoking hot wife and sexual fulfillment with everything that you could possibly want. I found an article by Christianity Today called In Search of Non-Toxic Male Sexuality. They actually detailed the issue pretty clearly, which was surprising and gave me some hope that maybe the church is starting to look in the right direction. Let me read you guys a portion of that article. It says, the church is beginning to grasp how purity culture objectifies women and dehumanizes them. What's often less appreciated is the way the movement has also dehumanized men. If purity culture dehumanized women by treating them as sexual objects, it dehumanized men by casting them as sexual animals. If it hypersexualized women's bodies, it hypersexualized men's minds. Much of our rhetoric and resources adopted the culture's assumption that men are helplessly and hopelessly hypersexual, a belief perpetuated in TV sitcoms and accepted in locker room talk. Christians will often critique the broader culture for its preoccupation with sex and sexual fulfillment, but the church is not innocent of fashioning its own sexual idols. While preaching abstinence and celibacy to singles and sexual minorities, some straight male preachers and authors turn around and gratuitously celebrate the glories of male sexual satisfaction in heterosexual marriage. In a bizarre twist on the prosperity gospel, some Christian teachers have argued that following God's design for sex is the path to your best sex life. Wives are charged to be more sexually available to their husbands as the solution to their struggles with pornography. Single men are told that God's provision for their out-of-control sexual desire is marriage, reducing a covenant relationship to a permissible sexual outlet. Since sexual satisfaction subtly becomes normalized as the rightful inheritance of godly men, certain forms of male sexual entitlement are all too common. The crisis of masculinity in the U.S. goes far beyond sex and sexuality, but these topics have emerged as a crux of the conversation in the evangelical church, and for good reason. And this promise isn't something that's told to you one time. This is in books. This is in sermons. Youth pastors tell you this so much that it's become a trope now. It's treated like a guarantee, a spiritual promise. But when puberty hits and people start to enter this dating and courtship phase, reality has to enter the picture. Boys might start actually dating girls. They might start actually kissing people or start feeling real desire for the first time. And all of a sudden, they might realize that it doesn't exactly match up with what they were taught in church. This user on Reddit said, "I was made to pledge myself to be chaste and pure before I even knew what sex was. I remember going to some special team purity sermon with my class as a 5th or 6th grader and being mostly bored and confused. The other kids in my class talked about how uncomfortable it was, especially with some of their parents there as chaperones. I ended up holding out for a while because I had made a promise to myself in a youth group sermon before finally realizing the whole thing was a farce when I was in my late teens. All of the warnings I had heard from pastors turned out to be complete bullshit. Did anyone else have someone do the whole paper glued together demonstration? For those of you who don't know, it's like if you have sex, it's like putting glue and sticking together, letting it dry, and then ripping it apart. And then each paper is going to have pieces of the other paper on them forever. And every time they do it with another paper and rip, then it's just like an unusable, terrible sheet of paper. That's what they compared sex to. The commenter goes on to say, "I'm in a loving relationship with my spouse now as a 31-year-old atheist, but I still struggle with a lot of that repressed guilt and fear over sex. Shit sucks, man." Yeah, I think that they summed it up really well. And you might think that that would be the start of freedom, but for a lot of people, these early realizations start a crisis. It creates a crisis because purity culture teaches you that if your experience doesn't match what the rules say, then you are the problem, not the rules. So if you don't feel that guilt or that shame, if you don't lose that respect for her after having sex with her, then that is a problem with your spirit. That's not a problem with purity culture rules. It's just going to show how far you've really fallen.
Every time a temptation is there, a lot of times, I got one of these little notes, and it's not about the notes, it's about the fact that, it's God's word, and we're capable of, doing all things in Christ, and that it includes overcoming sexual temptation. The internet's one of the biggest places where you can find sexual temptation, and to guard yourself from that, the biggest thing for me is to place reminders somewhere, like on the background of your computer, have a good verse about sexual temptation. And just having strong faith in the Lord will really protect your heart while you're at that.
Movies are definitely a hard thing because, when you're going to Blockbuster or Hollywood, they've always got those movies. And there's so many, like just about every movie that comes out anymore is rated R, PG-13.
These people are out there targeting younger audiences, because it's a big market, and a lot of times they try to push trends that really, if you look at it as a whole, would go against what God's word says about being pure and the clothing for the girls or what guys are supposed to do. You look at beer commercials are huge. Are they really advertising beer?
Purity culture teaches these men, even as they are starting to realize that it might not be true, that for even thinking that, they are a spiritual failure. They're broken, sinful, dangerous, and they're corrupt. Once you enter the real world, or you start dating, or experiencing some of these things that you're warned about, you start to realize that the purity culture guidelines and rules are very unclear, and they don't really make sense.
Man, I can't stop watching porn because I have an addiction, I think. Maybe, but have you ever stopped to ask why you keep going back to it? Because I'm weak. No, it's because you're hurting. See, everyone treats it like it's an addiction issue, but it's actually deeper than that. It's a needs issue. Every time you click, your brain's trying to fix something. Loneliness, stress, boredom, rejection. It's not random. You're trying to meet a real need in a fake way.
For example, maybe you kissed somebody and you don't feel like you need to marry them afterwards. Maybe you had sex with your girlfriend and you didn't actually lose respect for her at all. Maybe you had sex with her and you also didn't form a soul tie with her. No respect loss, no soul tie. Little confusing. Maybe you're somebody that masturbated and watched porn and realized that your heart was actually in the exact same condition afterwards. You just went to bed. And maybe you realized that a sex drive didn't make you dangerous or unable to be a partner or a servant of Christ.
Growing up in church, purity culture, where in Bible studies we'd have to go around and say how many times we had masturbated that week and then feel shame about it. There was definitely a benefit to this, or at least there was supposed to be this benefits. You're supposed to hold yourself pure until your marriage. You're not supposed to do anything sexual or even think any sexual thoughts. And the idea is that if you don't masturbate, you're going to think less sexual thoughts. And you're not going to be doing that physical act as well, which was itself sin unless it was outside of marriage. And they use, many different verses to support this. If you even look at a woman with lust, you've committed adultery with her in your heart. Those kind of things to really nail in that shame. The goal, of course, in the active conscious minds that we had at that time was we want to be pure to glorify God, because this is part of what it means to be set apart, to be a good person, is to reduce sin in that area of your life. But it definitely resulted in way more shame than holiness.
This Redditor said, in high school youth group, probably in my sophomore year, they gave everyone the lesser-known Joshua Harris book, Not Even a Hint. It's essentially a book based on the idea that if you look at somebody with lust, you've already committed adultery. Essentially, anything vaguely sexual needed to be avoided at all costs. Holy shit, did that fuck me up. I felt like even being attracted to someone was a sin, which made me feel like I was a disgusting, horrid creep. It's hard to pick apart what all caused what, but I had a really hard time dating even after I left the faith near the end of college. I had no idea how to date because even long after leaving, the idea of casual dating still felt wrong to me, even though in hindsight, I think it would have been incredibly good for me. Even when I was in situations where things could have happened, the anxiety and lack of confidence made me freeze up, which doesn't work out too well when men are expected to make the first move. A lot of men talk about learning self-hatred for the first time during this stage, during puberty. And think about how young of an age that really is and how sad that really is. This Redditor said, for me, I always felt pressure to stay pure and that I would be disappointing both God and my future wife if I slipped up. I worried that my wife would never fully satisfy me because I would always be comparing her to past partners and it would be harder to stay faithful. It also taught me to value virginity as a desirable trait in women and that even if they had been forgiven, it would never be something they would be able to give to me if they weren't, so it wouldn't be as special. This mental mindset took a while to unravel, even after I left, and really screwed up my head for a while. It's not uncommon to see men talking about their experience having sex for the first time, especially casual sex, and realizing that there wasn't this spiritual tie moment, that they didn't see the woman as being the mother of their future children, but they also didn't see her as being a, chewed up piece of gum either, that they still respected her, that actually the idea of this quick change in not respecting her or that wasn't accurate. That wasn't their lived experience. But a lot of people, especially if they're trying to stay in the church, they will feel that something is wrong with them, that there is something wrong with their spirit, that they don't feel that soul tie, that they don't feel that guilt, that they don't feel that shame. The impacts can be really huge. Some men don't even want to date at all during this time for fear that they might hurt the women that they love due to their own deviant sexual behaviors, masturbating, or their, deviant sexual fantasies, which would just be any at all.
Sexual purity is important, knowing that you're not the only one that's involved. You're bringing somebody else down with you, and so it's important to lift others up.
It's really important to be real about it. I know as a Christian guy myself, it'd be a lot easier just to tell our other Christian friends that we don't deal with sexual impurity and that it's just not there, or tell them that we don't have a problem with it, when really I know that myself included and a lot of my friends, we deal with it. What's important is to talk about those issues and to bring it up and to encourage each other in that way and to be in the Word with each other.
And especially if you have a good friend that you know has fallen down, just every time that he needs help, be there for him and just check up on him, because people need your help.
If we just push it under the carpet, it never gets solved, and we can really look all candy sugar-coated on the outside, when on the inside, sexual impurity is really rotting our walk with Christ and stealing the joy that we could have.
When it comes to being sexually pure, we really need to be an active part of each other's lives. We, instead of just knowing a lot of people, really be dig into somebody's life, not on a superficial level, but in there asking them the hard questions.
And some men don't want to date because they believe that they have a porn addiction or a masturbation addiction that they need to fix before they enter a relationship. And some men might give up on purity entirely. They might actually engage in hookup culture more, feeling that they're going to fail anyway, so it doesn't matter anyway. But it's all wrapped up in guilt and shame. The reality just is that it's hard to feel like you're ready for marriage if you've never even dated before. So this mindset they're told to have is never realistic from the start. Here's another direct quote from the I Kissed Shame Goodbye study. They always treated viewing porn like it was the worst possible thing I could have done to them. Interesting. I think it was probably one of the first times that I was really starting to catch on to the motivations that my parents had for certain things. Because one of the first things my dad brought up was that he was a deacon at the church and what would happen if they found out that his son had looked at porn. I was like, is that actually your chief concern? It's not about my well-being or the effects it could have on me. It's about how it would look for you. This just goes back to the culture of control.
What I would say to Christian girls is it's hard to understand the differences between us, knowing that guys struggle with sexual purity more by the way girls dress. And if we come to church wanting to worship God and keeping focused on God, it's harder for us with the impure way that people dress.
For those who do watch how they dress and how they act, to continue to do that and don't fall into the world standards like so many other girls are, and be the salt and the light for those other girls who, maybe for their older girls, teenagers, for just the little kids who look up, and it's a big impact on how people around them dress.
Every Christian guy would rather see you as a sister in Christ than as an object, and part of that involves the way you dress and how you present yourself. And when we go to church, the house of worship, we want to be really able to focus on Christ and not on how someone's dressed. A lot of times it's a struggle. So please, dress modestly.
These young people think that they need to have strict accountability, that they need accountability partners to work with, to talk to about these things. They might even download Covenant Eyes willingly on their computers and their phones. They might feel the urge to confess to other people, and they might just feel like they have to surveil themselves all the time, which is exhausting. It's hard to do. And then there are some people who reach the breaking point early on and give up entirely because they know that they can never reach the impossible standard. They might swing too hard in the opposite direction and engage in hookup culture, which might not actually be the best thing for them. It might also make them keep secrets or lead a double life of sorts, which can make them feel even worse and still pile on the shame and guilt, just like the other people who are actually keeping the purity culture rules. These people were taught that they had already failed from the get-go and that Christian women, good Christian women, deserve somebody more pure than them. And while people might argue that men have it easier when it comes to stereotypes around purity, I would say that a lot of men actually do experience the same shame in the church. What a lot of these people complain about now, looking back, is that purity culture never actually provides you with a way to meet other people or to date. If your parents don't have someone in line for you to pray over for you and set it up for you, how are you going to find someone? It really only teaches people to be afraid of dating and to avoid it at all costs. It never teaches you how to have intimacy, how to form long-term connections. It only teaches you how to avoid people of the opposite sex so that you can avoid lust and temptation. Have 1,000 rules and still not know how to have a healthy relationship, especially when all of the ideas around it are so steeped in fear. By the time these young purity culture steeped men enter adulthood, they carry a very deep fear with them. That they don't really know how to be a good partner, or that they're not ready to be a good partner because they haven't taken care of these flaws, or that they don't know if they can carry the financial and leadership burden of the entire family for the rest of their lives. They might be afraid that they're not a safe partner, and that is devastating.
Within church, it was like, don't watch porn, don't talk about sex, don't think about sex. you'll get a girl to use to basically take care of all that once you get married. That's really what it was, if they said it that bluntly, which sometimes they did. But it's like that mentality is what we were told. It's like, you struggle with porn, once you have sex, then you can have sex with your wife, it'll be okay, just don't be doing this. And it's like, that's a lot of really unhealthy expectation for the wife, because she has to be the porn star basically for you at your beck and call. And then for the guy, it's like, your only view is that now I get to put this into something, which is like, that's a really scary. I think
it's not a mutual thing.
Yeah.
It's like, this is for you and she's the vessel.
And you're told women don't care about sex. That's a guy thing.
There can be a lot of negative impacts during married life as well. Sex might feel like they're disrespecting their wives, which will make them want to have sex less and might make them turn to porn as a crutch. This is the opposite of what most Christian women would expect from a partner, and is just going to keep confirm that the porn is better than them or that it's filling some role that it shouldn't be. And it might be, but the primary issue is the purity culture, not the porn.
I think one of the most damaging things about purity culture is the expectation that you're going to be one way and then instantly be a totally different way. As we're growing up, it's pretty normal to start to experience things and to build intimacy with friends, to start to have romantic interests, and then slowly build that physical connection with other people, eventually leading to a robust and healthy sex life. It's also normal when you're growing up to have crushes on people, to be attracted to people, and to explore the kind of people you're attracted to, and to be attracted to multiple people at the same time. To have crushes, to have feelings, to just be human. But within purity culture, you're expected to have this total switch in your brain when you get married. You should be attracted to multiple people. You should be attracted to people. It's pretty normal that people are attractive, but when you get married, you shouldn't be attracted to anyone ever again. You can never acknowledge that people are pretty. If you go to work and you have a coworker and they're attractive, you go home and you never acknowledge to your spouse that your coworker is attractive. In fact, you probably shouldn't talk to that coworker or have lunch with that coworker or acknowledge that coworker's existence at all. You have to be creepily rejective of that person while not acknowledging that they are attractive at all. You are no longer allowed to acknowledge that you experience attraction. You're no longer allowed to be human in that way. Now, when it comes to physical contact with other people, physical intimacy, you're not allowed to explore anything. You can want to explore everything, but you can't explore anything. There is no gradual buildup of intimacy until you get married. Then you are expected to go straight to intercourse, PIV intercourse, every day for the rest of your life. None, every day. Those are the two options. You're seen as a horrible person in that culture if you have any intercourse before you're married, and you're seen as a horrible person in that culture if you don't have enough intercourse after you're married. There is no okay amount. There is no in between. Because if you don't have intercourse 3 to 7 times a week, then your partner will cheat on you, and for some reason it's your fault. Your partner who doesn't acknowledge that they experience attraction in any way whatsoever and isn't allowed to talk to people of the opposite gender anymore. That complete cultural 180 is wild, and it's damaging to your system. It's shocking. And really, it just encourages people to lie all the time.
This Reddit user says, I was taught that men were all essentially one temptation away from sex. Looking back on my sexless, nerdy high school life, it seems ridiculous, but I was under the impression that sex was something I could not control. I chose my Christian college in part to keep myself from becoming a teen father. When I went to college, they told all of us that we were potential rapists. I was taught not to do things, but never given the skills to not actually do them. Marriage was sold as this place where you can finally let go and have consequence-free sex. When they start using addiction language, this can heap on the shame and fuel the cycle even further. In this type of scenario, no one is happy. The wife feels disrespected either way, and the man feels like he is disrespecting the wife no matter what, whether he has sex with her or whether he doesn't and takes care of it himself. And if the sex life isn't what they are both promised, then it can be really confusing for them. Fathers can also have really odd relationships with their daughters or be unsure in how to engage in conversations with them about intimacy.
The thing that I would say to parents regarding their kids' morality is just always be checking up on them. Just see what they're doing, what they're looking at when they're home alone, or even when they're just at a friend's house. Just always be checking up and making sure they're doing okay.
It's really important for the parents to start when the children are young, because I think that if a parent doesn't have good discipline for the children when they're young, they're not going to even care to listen to the parents when they're getting older.
I know it's hard and surprising for a teen to say, get your parents involved, but it's true. Because from my experience with my parents, they saved me a lot of heartache and a lot of problems just by being involved with my life.
You have good discipline when they're young. They're obviously not going to like it, but as you get older and you let it go a little easier, they're going to be well trained, and they'll really thank you.
Encourage parents. I've said this before, and it usually isn't very popular, but if you have a junior high boy who has a laptop computer or a desktop or whatever, or access to a computer in the privacy of his own room, you may as well just buy hundreds and hundreds of pornographic magazines, stack them up in his closet, and say, hey, don't look at those, okay? Because, folks, that's how easy it is. Access on the internet to all of this stuff. I said this one time at this church, and a mother came up to me afterwards and said, I can't believe you said that. I trust my son, 7th grade son who had private access to the internet in his own room. I said, well, I don't know how to say this, but I used to be a 7th grader, and I'll tell you right now that you think you're trusting your son, but in fact, you're abusing your son. You don't mean to, you don't think you are, but you could hand him a gun and his life might turn out better than if you just let him go wherever he wants to go on the internet. We have in our church, not dozens, but cumulatively, hundreds of men who have become addicted to pornography, and for most of them, it started in junior high and high school, and these days, it's starting through internet access.
And so, Randy, you've done a lot of research on this stuff. Could you tell us, both men and women, what effect will pornography have in marriage and also for future marriage?
Well, it kills the heart. It makes somebody go nowhere in their relationship with God. They live under guilt. They live under oppression. And by the way, there is freedom from this bondage. And there's numbers of things going on at the church, things coming up, the different men's things that relate to purity. There's recovery groups. You can, if you are in bondage to it, you can break out of it. Right now, I'm talking about preventing some of it from happening in the first place. But consequences, when it goes into a marriage, a guy will compare his wife to the images, the airbrushed images that he has in his mind from years of being addicted to pornography. And she's never going to match up, and he's going to have eyes that are going to be always going to other women. And so the blazer dancers come on, the blazer cheerleaders, whatever. And by the way, men, and young men included, if your eyes are on the blazer dancers and the cheerleaders or whatever, you have to ask yourself, are you pleasing God when you're looking at them, and what is going through your mind? Unless you're wired differently than me and almost every man I know, certain thoughts are going through your mind as this, and this is why you should turn away, and you should not be watching. And fathers, set an example for your sons and for your daughters. I mean, I cannot emphasize this enough, how much damage we do to our own children who we love when we don't set the right example for them. It's not a casual, secondary, unimportant thing. It's something that the way of immorality, Proverbs tells us, leads to death. And the Father is saying, don't let it kill you. Don't let it trap you in the noose. It's going to take you down if you let yourself go that way. And as a loving Father, He's warning, and He's saying, son, don't go there. And He's setting the example for His son by not going there himself.
You might also find that they still have a need to masturbate after they get married, and that being married didn't take this urge away. It's very common in purity culture for men to be taught that if they can just hold off while they're single, they won't feel the need to look at porn or masturbate after marriage, which is just not the case. They can also feel like they don't really have control over themselves, which is terrifying for them. And finally, they'll blame themselves for all of these issues. This is just going to further impact their libido, their confidence, and their interactions and relationships with the women in their life. It can also be confusing when they're married trying to interpret the wife's concerns or problems that are stemming from her own experience with purity culture. First of all, men might feel like they're entitled or owed sex at the beginning, and then later, as they start to deconstruct these beliefs about purity culture, they might feel like a sexually coercive creep or a criminal once they start healing. And this isn't to minimize mistakes that are made, but it does just set people up for failure, and it sets them up to be stuck in this shame cycle.
As a male, I thought I was fully convinced that I was addicted to sex before I had even had it. Before I had even touched another human being in that manner. I thought I was addicted to sex because I had these thoughts and I had these desires and I had these wants that lived inside of me, and I was battling them so hard. I remember crying myself to sleep every night because I thought I was going to hell for the thoughts and the desires that I was having inside this teenage hormonal body.
On the other hand, men might also feel like they personally owe their wife sex, and the sex life can be traumatic for them as well. They might feel like they have to meet a certain amount of times a week to make her happy, because the Bible does say that your bodies belong to each other. The previous issues I've talked about are all compounded and heightened when kids come along and the lifestyle starts to change. When people are exhausted and they experience the financial strain that can come along with having kids. Gendered roles can also be leaned into not as a way for men to neglect their wives, but is a comfortable caricature of what they actually know. For people who grew up this way, it's like returning to your roots. It's muscle memory for them. They're mimicking what their fathers did too. That doesn't mean that it's healthy or the right thing to do, but this distance can only worsen the intimacy issues, which the head of the household is then ultimately blamed for. And even in a two-parent working household, the man is still seen as being ultimately responsible for the family's financial well-being. If you don't homeschool, if your wife is sick or chronically ill, if your child isn't behaving right, all of that is going to be seen as a failure on you, the husband. It's a failure to not manage your home and your God-given resources to the point that your wife doesn't have to work.
As a divorce lawyer, I just like to say that waiting until marriage to have sex for the first time is a really bad idea. I have done a number of divorces on very short marriages, usually somewhere between 2 months and a year, involving individuals who didn't have sex until they got married. And then when they got married, they realized there were many other issues that they were going to have to deal with because of their physical incompatibility. There are lots of reasons for this. Oftentimes, somebody might actually not be heterosexual and not really realize that until they've gotten married. Other reasons might be that there are physical limitations to them actually completing the act. Most of all, what you find out is that people who haven't had those relations before or with each other before find that they have very different ideas about sexual relations with someone of the opposite sex in terms of giving and receiving. Look, I've never bought a car before that I didn't test drive first.
Here's another direct quote from the I Kissed Shaming Goodbye study. Despite the focus on purity, most participants stated that they received virtually no education regarding sex, much less how to access to information about contraception or safe sex practices. Participant 4 recalled, "My mom can't even say the word sex. It's the same in English as in Korean, but she calls it sex. She just can't say the word. It's definitely something I would never talk to about with my father." Most participants' parents, instead of simply feeling embarrassment about bringing up the topic, intentionally chose for their children to remain ignorant of basic facets of sex. Finally, I do want to talk to you guys about the lack of support out there. It can be hard to find therapists who know about purity culture or really understand the stuff intimately. If you've gone through it, you understand that it's virtually impossible to find somebody. Even people who claim they grew up in the church might not have grown up in this same style of Christianity and therefore won't really know what you're talking about. This is a quote from somebody in that study I've been reading to you guys, and it says, "My therapist just straight up told me at one point when I brought purity culture up, she was like, look, I would really love to help you through that because I feel like you want help with it. I'm just going to be honest. I'm 100% not qualified to handle that," because she wasn't raised in that environment and she had never had to deal with it. "I would not know where to start in helping you unpack all of that." And that was the end of my experience in therapy. It was helpful in that she didn't make things worse, but having a therapist who is just like, no, I feel for you, kid, that sucks, but like, you need to go talk to someone else about that, it did surprise me at the time. I was grateful that she didn't pursue something that she wasn't qualified for, but the fact that I was like, you have a whole degree in this field, shouldn't there have been something somewhere in there for you to deal with this? That is very true. It can be hard to find counselors, therapists, groups where they actually talk about this stuff and deal with it. It's hard to find people who understand, and when you bring something up and people start giving you side eyes or don't know what the fuck you're talking about, it can only make you feel worse and more ashamed. The findings of the study established that the experience of millennials specifically within fundamentalist Christian purity culture had the potential to do harm well into adulthood. The damage done was not limited to sex and relationships. One of the hardest parts is that there is no research, almost no research around this, and therefore there really isn't a lot of great language for it yet. People don't know how to talk about these experiences, and a lot of men have brought up the difficulty of talking about it when it seems like purity culture as a phrase aligns a lot more with teen girls, even though that's not really the case. What do you guys think about this video? Do you think that purity culture is impacting one group more than another? If you made it this far, please like the video, hit subscribe, hit share, and copy link. You don't have to send it anywhere, I promise, but it helps way more than you think that it does. And if you want to see more content like this and more in-depth content about my personal journey with spirituality, please become a member to my channel. It does help me a lot to have that support. So thank you guys so much for watching once again, and I will see you guys in the next one.
So to combat the rise in purity culture, I think all of us need to start engaging in hedonism culture, which means this summer I need everybody's body count to be in the triple digits, and we're drinking wine publicly everywhere we go.
Do you hunger and thirst for righteousness? Cause if you do, you're about to get filled. If you ain't never been filled with the Holy Ghost, then get ready, you're about to get sealed. Like I've been saved, but I'm not quite there, and I just don't know what I don't know. But what I do know is I got baptized in Jesus' name, I got filled with the Holy Ghost. Like, go and make disciples of all nations and baptize them. Then they can go and tell their friends and make disciples and baptize them. See, what he's trying to say when he's saying what he said, he ain't speaking to elites, but he's speaking to the people. If you know how to give to your kids, just imagine what he give, cause he's good, he's not evil. Yeah, but you gotta get your ear checked. No Holy Ghost, get close to the stiff neck. Yeah, cause he rolled with humility. Go where he goes, knowing that you don't know anything. Yeah, cause there's life in the blood, power in the blood. Worthy is the lamb, like yeah. And then chains got broke, dust on my feet. I shake them when I leave like peace. Shake them when I leave like peace. Shake them when I leave like peace.